So I don't know if you've noticed this, but even in the past 10, 15 years, there's been a dramatic increase in the amount of noise and the amount of distractions there are. I'm not that old, right? And even from the time when I was in high school, even early college, the amount of just noise and distractions have increased dramatically. And that's not to say that there wasn't a lot when I was in high school and college, but just to say that there really is a dramatic increase. There's this quote I really find very profound. It's from a Christian philosopher. His name is Soren Kierkegaard. And he says that if I were a doctor and I were allowed to prescribe one medicine to cure all of man's ills, he said, I would prescribe silence. He says that even if the word of God were proclaimed, modern man couldn't hear it because it'd be drowned out with noise. He says, therefore, create silence. So this guy is writing this in like the early 1800s. Okay. So there's no electricity, there's no music, there's no headphones, there's no smartphones, there's no internet. Um, there's just all the things that actually distract us and fill our lives with noise. None of these things are even present when he is alive. And if he's saying that this would be the one thing he would prescribe to cure all of our ills would be silence, I find that very surprising. What would he say about today's society? Again, even in the year 2000, I'm sure like what he would think would just be he would be blown away by all the noise, and then let alone today in 2025, just how much noise there is. And so the reality is that you and I as human beings, we're made to have silence. I mean, even if you just think of like the history of the human species, of course, there's just the lack of technology. When it became nighttime, you couldn't really do a whole lot of things. And so just being in nature, being outside, it's just very clear that silence is something that's part of a creature's life. I mean, certainly you can look at all the other animals as well. So we're pretty unique in just the amount of noise that we have, but we really should respect our design that God has given us, that we were made to have more silence. And this is even just on a psychological level. But of course, as a priest, I would really see the significance of this spiritually. So God speaks to us in the silence. God actually speaks to us very often. He speaks through many things, but sometimes it's not until we have silence to reflect on what's going on in the mind, what's going on in our heart, that we can actually perceive what God is saying. So I'm not going to fully address the topic of silence now because there's so many facets to it, but I just want to talk about ways to, as we go into 2025, or I guess if you're listening to this later on, another year, but just moving forward to create more time for silence. So one would just be having daily space for silence, especially when we wake up and before we go to bed. We should really have time of prayer, have time of silence to connect with God. I remember I've had roommates who, like, the second they wake up, they're like playing the news, or they're playing to some sort of, I don't know, like music that's not necessarily that prayerful, just some sort of noisy pop or popular music, just right when they wake up. And I'm just thinking, man, what a horrible way to start the day. And then yeah, before bed too, like it's tempting to be checking social media or messages like right before we fall asleep. So having daily time of silence, one for prayer, but even just especially in the morning, as I said, and before we go to bed. The main reason I wanted to make this video was actually to talk about the importance of having retreats. So retreats are this way that we design and create room for silence in our lives. One, I think every Sabbath, in a little way, is supposed to be some sort of retreat. Doesn't mean we have to drive somewhere. Doesn't mean the entire day has to be silent, but that's really God's design and intention for the Sabbath. It would be this weekly place that we'd have to connect with God. And that's really what it's for. It is to rest from work, but it's really to connect with family and to connect with God. And I think in today's world, Sunday just becomes the day where it's like, all right, this is where I can catch up on the to-do list. This is where I can go grocery shopping. This is where I can do these other chores, get caught up on things that aren't related to work or sports. Well, even then, sports happens a lot on Sundays too. But yes, God's intention for the Sabbath was to create weekly space, a rhythm that we would have to connect with our Creator. So every Sabbath, and we as Christians, we treat Sunday as a Sabbath. We really should have extra time to connect with God, extra time for silence, extra time for prayer, extra time for reading the scriptures, extra time for doing other spiritual reading, extra time to be outside in God's creation. It's an important way that we can connect with Him. So having that weekly routine is important. And maybe if it's possible to even have something once a month that's a little bit extra special. So maybe it's actually just one Sunday a month, you're extra generous with prayer, extra time for silence, extra time for reading, extra intentional about not scheduling a bunch of extra things. And I know that I'm not a father of a young family, so I get that I have a different lifestyle than other people. But even with brother priest, we try to once a month we have what's called like a monk day where we try to have extra time for prayer. So even on a normal day off, taking time for prayer, but then with some brother priest to have extra time for prayer, extra time for reading. We will still take time to connect and socialize with each other in a more meaningful way, but then also having that intentional time of silence together is really powerful. But really, really, I want to talk about the importance of having a retreat at least once a year. Jesus himself had to take time aside to connect with his Father. So again, Jesus was living a time where there wasn't the smartphones, there wasn't the Bluetooth headphones, there wasn't Spotify Premium or Apple Music, whatever you have. You didn't have remotely the distractions we have today. Like I think most of us, even just time traveled to that time and lived an ordinary day of anybody, would be like, wow, this is so refreshing. This is so much more peaceful, just the way that people live. And yet Jesus himself, Jesus had to take time, uh, take time away from all the noise. He went out in the wilderness to pray. It says this in more than one time. Jesus did that. Even when there's a lot of important things to do, he was healing people, he was preaching the gospel. He had to prioritize and he had to create space in his life for silence to connect with his Father. Because prayer isn't just about asking for things. It's about this relationship. Prayer is about being with God. So again, if Jesus Christ, much more than once a year, by the way, if Jesus Christ, who is fully human and fully God, had to take time for silence, how much more do we need to take time for retreats for silence? So I can't fully explain to every listener or watcher, where to find a retreat because that's going to depend on where you're at. But yeah, I can't just be searching the web for retreat centers to see what retreats are offered at a particular retreat center. Just another option apart from a specific retreat center is just could be a hotel, it could be an Airbnb, whatever it might be. Just going somewhere that's maybe a little more out in nature. It's a little bit less around the noise. Maybe going to a house or hotel that's maybe near a church. But I think getting time to connect with God in nature and then connect with God in the presence of a church, having just a more free schedule just to do spiritual reading, whether it's a spiritual book and reading the scriptures. These are really, really helpful practices. And I think we can maybe resist it because it's not part of our routine. A lot of us maybe have not gone on any significant retreats. Maybe we did like a required confirmation retreat for half a day, but as adults, maybe nothing more than that. And so don't be intimidated. Just kind of envision it as you would a vacation where it's like, okay, I'm taking time aside to do something more relaxing. But sometimes even vacations aren't always that refreshing, especially when it's like filled with a bunch of things. So I know for me personally, I've just done normal vacations, like went to a beach in Florida and hung out with some friends versus just like other ones where I took more time for prayer. And the ones where I'm more intentional about connecting with God is always more refreshing. I would just encourage you to plan. I'm posting this at the beginning of the year, but you might watch this later. To plan, look far ahead. When are you going to take time for a retreat? Just a time to get away. Could be to connect with family, but also to connect with God. But plan ahead because this is something important. The Jews had to travel to Jerusalem to make pilgrimages. And so we ourselves, if God thought that was important for them, it's still important for us to, in our year, to prioritize going somewhere to connecting with God. We can connect with God in our ordinary environment, like in our house, but there is an extra power, spiritually speaking, about going to a different place that really just mentally and spiritually designates this time is for God. Get out your calendar, plan ahead, maybe go with a friend or two, maybe plan something with your family. Follow those tips I gave to you before. Again, this is not just some sort of obligation. This isn't just a priest telling you to do another thing, to add another thing to your list. Retreats really are um, the highlight of the year. And I think as we get used to doing them, we'll come to enjoy them more and more. So that'd be another towards the beginning of the year tips I would give for us during this new year. God bless.